Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This video we are going to take a look at least 5, maybe 6, I can't remember the count, various brands and versions of etched razor wire. For a while, if you remember a ways back, I did a review of Secret Weapons razor wire, which I thought was the standard that I wanted to go with going forward. And I had a viewer, thank you once again, love my viewers, who alerted me to the fact that there was another brand that he had discovered, Eduard, it's from the Czech Republic, and he was saying that I might be interested in taking a look at it, but he had some questions about its scale, so I ordered a couple of those. I saw that the scale did seem a little off, I wasn't quite sure, so I thought I'd order another one from that company that had another scale, and I realized there are quite a few out there. Who knew? Military modelers. There's quite a few brands. So I thought I'd buy one of everybody's, and then we could do a comparison of all of them and look at 3 key aspects of them. One, their general appearance compared to a miniature, and I'm using a GW model as the standard since a lot of the market here, right, we play 30mm games. They're not really 28, they're really 30, and then I wanted to compare that appearance to the other scales that are available. A brief word about scales. I've shot this video 3 times in the intro, 2 more times, because scale is a weird thing, and it took me a while to get my head around how to get an accurate measurement for scale. So very briefly, and we'll put some of this below so that you can follow along, because it's kind of number heavy. The standard wargaming miniature war, World War II, that kind of idea, military models, scales are typically, say, 1/35th, although, of course, there are others. And 1/35th is going to be the largest scale. That means that when you look at one of the objects in 1/35th, the actual object is 35 times larger, okay? Now, in that scale, I have notes here because I've had so much trouble keeping this straight in my head. Let's see here. In 1/35th, we would call that 52mm to compare to the 30, and that would have 8mm per foot. Now, the next smallest scale is 1/48th, and I do have a representation of 1/48th scale, and that would be equal to 38mm scale compared to our normal gaming. And please don't, I don't mean to diss 15mm and 20mm scale gaming. It's just I'm looking for the general thing here. And that would be 6mm per foot. And GW, Privateer Press, all of those games are going to be 30mm, and we can lump 28 into that, okay? It's very close, and probably like Infinity is closer to 28mm. And then that is going to be, and I should say, like Lord of the Rings, although they're not going to use razor wire, that's probably closer to, say, 25mm maybe, all right? 30mm is equal to 1/61st, all right? 1/61, which is the smallest of the scales that I'll be looking at today. Just for a key point, 15mm is about 1 to 100, 1 to 120, if I remember. Okay, so that's getting much smaller. But 30mm, 1/61st, and that would be 5mm per foot. Okay, so those are the numbers to keep in mind when we take a look at this. I'm going to throw out a few of those numbers, and we'll do some comparisons, and we're going to change those numbers into feet so we can get a more normal perspective, because a lot of people aren't fluent in metric, but we'll include the metric as well. And what I'd like to do is look at their appearance primarily, because I think that's the most important, right? It's a very visual game. Then I'd like to consider scale as the secondary importance, and I do think it's important. For me, scale is a pretty important thing. And then the third aspect, which we'll do at the end of this video, is to look at their cost per foot of wire that you get when you purchase them, so we can consider the economics of these pieces as well. So, it's a lot to talk about, but I'm going to try to be succinct. I don't know if I'm already off of that. And then we'll come back after we take a look at them and we'll wrap it up. So before I blather on, let's take a look. So we're going to take a look first at Alliance Modelworks razor wire, right? 1/35th scale, and you get 9 feet here, 3 yards. And here's what it looks like. Basically, if I didn't mention it before, I don't think so, what you do is, if you're not familiar with brass etch, is you clip along these edges here where it's attached to the sprue, and then find the center ones and clip along those as well to remove the wire from the sprue. Now, the Alliance razor wire, let's compare it to, oh, he's probably going to be, oh, not too bad. He's probably going to be just a little out of focus, at least part of him here. But we can take a look at its appearance to him. I think that doesn't look too bad, actually. This is a GW Orc from 40K. He stands at about 32-33 millimeters in size, just for comparison, but orcs are supposed to be a little bigger than men in any case, so that gives you a sense. And the Alliance for each of these barbs. So at 1/35th scale, which is what it's intended for, it's about 3 inches in size, which is actually a little big, because when I did my research, again, if I forgot to mention it in the intro, it is about 1 to 2 inches on average for concertina wire being sold today, sometimes a little smaller. So that's about 3 inches. Now, in scale for 1/64, 30 millimeter, that is actually about 5 inches across. So that's kind of big, but surprisingly doesn't look too bad, at least in my opinion, against a 40K model. So that's the Alliance. And I'm going to keep this card here over the felt because they stick to the felt like mad. It's very tangly material to work with. Then we're going to take a look at the secret weapon, okay, which I mentioned before. Put a link to the old video here. And the secret weapon razor wire, all right, looks like this. There we go. And you can see actually here how not every one is attached to the sprue, and so some of them have actually started to get a little off of that. I can't even put it back in the package now because of that. It's you know, it tangles easily. But you can see here a much denser arrangement of the wires, and more places along the way to clip them. And here is our orc again. Now, this looks a little bit small, perhaps, for a 40K orc, but this is pretty accurate in terms of scale. Each of these barbs is 1 millimeter across, which equates to 2.5 inches for 30 millimeter, and about 1.5 inches for 1/35th. So this really could be used for either of those scales, at least according to the scale accuracy of it. So this is the secret weapon. Let's get rid of that. And let's take a look at accurate armor. All right. Accurate armor. Uh-oh, look at this. I put it back in the package. Give me a second here to take that out. Actually, it took me a while to get it back in the package. All right, I'll have to store these outside of their package somehow. That doesn't make a problem. So, accurate armor, barbed wire, 2 frets, and actually, if you look, here we go. Right, there's 2 sheets attached. So that gives you a sense. Now, this is barbed wire, not razor wire. Keep that in mind. But I think it's actually got a good pattern for barbed wire. I kind of like it. Here's our miniature in comparison. The accurate armor is 1 millimeter, maybe a hair over for the length of the barbs, which gives us, again, 1.5 inches to scale for 35th, and 2.5 inches to scale for 30 millimeter models. So, right at the edge of big, but I think with these oversized miniatures, especially Forge GW, that's actually kind of fitting, maybe not too poorly there. And it's probably going to be a little easier to de-sprue because you do have a little space between all of the rows, and of course you just have to clip along the middle here. But multiple runners in the middle here make this a lot more secure when you're storing it, so you don't have pieces trying to puck up along the way, except right there. Did that break off? I don't know. Yep, oh, that broke right there. Anyway, so that gives you an idea of the accurate armor. Let's keep going. What else do we have? This was, to me, the most interesting one to take a look at. Here we go. Forge World. I was very interested in both its cost and appearance. Now this is barbed wire, okay, not razor wire. And what you're going to see here is something pretty unique. This is the only wire that actually has a pattern in the wire itself to give it the appearance that it has been wrapped. So there are these little gaps and twists etched into the wire to give it more of the fact that it is, being twisted as it's assembled, which is more accurate for barbed wire, which is kind of interesting. I think that's kind of a neat feature, but somehow it looks wrong to me. I don't know. Personal preference. Everybody's going to have one. And here is our orc again. Give you a little sense of what that looks like. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the accurate the Forge World barbs are actually 2 millimeters across. That's kind of big, actually. That's kind of big. That makes these about 5 inches in width for the 30 millimeter gaming. That's big. That's way out of scale for barbed wire. Like, way out of scale. This isn't even razor wire. Way, way out of scale. About 3 inches in length for 1/35. I think this would be more appropriate at 1/35, in my opinion. But in any case, that's what Forge World looks like. Kind of interesting. And, stuck to the felt. Here we go. And then let's take a look at Eduard. I don't know how they say it. So here we have Eduard's 1/48th. Okay, this is the only 1/48th scale that we have in this collection. Now this is their 1/48th barbed wire 1. That's important because they have all sorts of, names that look very, very similar. So this is their 1/48th barbed wire 1. Now the first thing I noticed, there we go. Wow, is that dense? Wow. Okay, that's a lot of wire, very, very close to each other. This is 26 feet of wire. It's the highest amount of wire of any of the sprues, and my real concern with this is actually cutting these apart without them getting tangled. That's you have to be really careful with that. Now these barbs for the barbed wire are actually oriented this way, and this is really probably, they're so small it's almost a little hard to see them, I have a feeling, although at 1080 maybe we can see it. Maybe I'll zoom in post-edit and see if we can get a little bit closer look. Here is our orc. So very, very small barbs, but technically kind of accurate. They are just about 1 millimeter, and that makes it 1.5 millimeters for, or 1.5 inches for 1/35, 2.5 inches for 1/61. That's our 30 millimeter, and 2 inches for the intended scale 1/48. But this is barbed wire and not razor wire, so it's really not the best scale, but in fact, if anything, it's on the larger size, which is kind of interesting. I think this would look good for fencing, wire, but I don't know. Anyway, we can all judge for ourselves. 1/48 Eduard barbed wire 1. Now let's take a look at their 1/35. All right, barbed wire razor 1. All right, so this is supposed to be razor wire in the 1/35 scale, and throw that over there. And here's what it looks again. Very, very, very small. A very dense sprue. These points are basically points, very tiny. They don't even look quite like razors, and they don't look like barbed wire. And you can see here just how small those are. Very, very tiny. They equal about a 1/2 millimeter across. So those razors, if they were razors, are going to be 1.25 inches for the scale 30 millimeter, which technically actually is within range. It's on the small side though. And this is going to be 0.75 inches, 3/4 of an inch for 1/35th, the intended scale, which I think is actually too small for 1/35th. That's really cutting it close on the small side. But I think it could be used for something in 30K game, 30K in 30 millimeter gaming. If you were to use it for something, I don't know, in addition to razor wire, with some creativity, I think it could have an interesting look. But it's really on the small side. And for our last look, we're going to take a look at Eduard 1/35th barbed wire razor 2. Okay, so the last one was razor 1. This is razor 2. And when we take a look at that, all right, technically they actually are orientated this way on the sprue. Again, look at the density of these. Very, very tight. I think that's going to be a little tangly when you remove it. Here is our work one more time. Take a look at that. And these are about 1 millimeter, again, which is 1.5 in the intended scale, inches, and 2.5 inches for 30 millimeter models. So that gives you a little idea of how these all stack up in terms of appearance. And now let's break out from the close-up and we'll take a look at their cost and length. So having taken a look at them, let's take a look at their costs. All right, so let's go down the list. Secret weapon is you get 18 feet in that strip. And the price breaks down to it's about $15 for that sheet. So we're a little over $1 per foot. All right, and we'll put a list right here of all of these so we can keep them in track a little more easily. Now the Accurate Armour, I was having a little trouble finding them in the U.S. It's a British product. I did purchase all of these from a U.S. distributor or on eBay, so a little searching will probably turn them up. But that is $16 for 18 feet. So again, we're right about the secret weapon price, little over $1 per foot. Now the Eduard, and that's how I'm going to pronounce it, 1/48 is $13 for 26 feet. So much cheaper. You get a lot more wire for your dollar there, about 50 cents a foot. And their 1/35th razor wire is $7 for 26 feet. So now we're getting about 3 feet, little over per dollar. So that's even a better value. Their 1/35th barbed wire is $7 again for 26 feet, same value. The Alliance barbed wire or razor wire is $9 for 9 feet, another $1 per foot. And the Forge World was surprising. Normally we all think of Forge World as excessively expensive, but I picked up that sheet at $14 and you get 13 feet, so that's another $1 per foot. So really all of these brands are coming in at about $1 per foot. And so really we can sort of discard cost as a real consideration for these, since it doesn't really come into a major difference unless you want to look at the Eduard value, if I should say that. But again, so that leads me to scale and appearance. And I really think, for my personal preference, the Secret Weapon I still think holds up. It's got great scale. Looks good. You get a lot on a sheet, so you don't have to buy a lot of sheets. I thought the Accurate Armour looks pretty good as well, even though it's a little bit big. Let me look back at my notes again. The Accurate Armour, it's on the higher side for our scale in terms of size, but still looks pretty good. I thought that the Alliance barbs look good, but they're the most out of scale, so something to consider. But of course, when we look at Forge World, that's the same scale for them. And I think Forge World way out of scale, if I were to complain about that. So while it has a unique look, I think it just looks too big. Although maybe it looks okay against a Terminator, and maybe in the, you know, in the year 40,000 or whatever, you know, they have to make their barbed wire huge because everybody's got power armor. Although how barbed wire stops power armor, I'm not sure, but you know, maybe that's their thinking in it. But I think it looks a little too much for my personal taste. And the Eduard, there's so many. Let me look. The Eduard 135th barbed wire razor 2, I think also will look pretty good. But I think cutting this off the sprue, so to speak, ooh, I look at it and I just I shudder, because they're so close to each other. One thing that I didn't mention is that when you are pulling these off of the sprue, they will get tangled very easily. Those little barbs lock together, and it can be a real nightmare to separate them. So you really need to cut and peel off each one very carefully and keep them all separate and straightened out until you're ready to wrap it up on a pen or whatever you're going to use to make the concertina coils. So, ease of use is also a factor you may want to consider when you take a look at them. So, hopefully, with all of that information, looking at their scale, looking at their cost, looking at their appearance, you can find one of these that meets your personal tastes and checkbook, if you will, for you. And I will definitely be using probably all of these for different kinds of applications, because even the ones that seem the most out of scale will kind of have a fit, I think, in certain kinds of layouts. Even the Eduard with just the little tiny dots on it, I think could have a place in sort of maybe ruined buildings, or there's ways that you could integrate it. But I wouldn't recommend purchasing it outright for concertina wire, as it just seems lacking in the appearance factor. So hopefully that helps you out. Thank you once again for joining me. Don't forget that you can submit my flag. Let's throw that away. Don't forget that you can submit question and answers if you're interested in getting something specific answered, and you send that to the Q&A website. Why do I always have trouble with that? The Q&A email address, which is TerranScapes@gmail.com. If you want to email me personally for something, questions that are longer than, say, in the comment section that you'd like a little advice on, feel free to do that, and that is mike@TerranScapes.com. And you may want to sign up for the newsletter. I'm going to be typing up one, clickety-click, right after this goes up, and it's going to talk a little bit about the future of TerranScapes. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be making some changes. They're not all ironed out. Sometime around the beginning of June, I'll probably have some of that fixed. If you're interested in keeping abreast of that, you can check that out. And don't forget, I'm also on Twitter, and you can follow me there and see me complain aggressively about trying to shoot this video twice and having it be a butchered version. Butchered. It's hard to get all this stuff right, So, thank you once again for joining me, and I will see you again soon in another TerranScapes video.